All right, welcome everybody. So it's 4 o'clock, and it's really just good to be together. I'm glad for everyone who's joined us. Huge thank you for Jim, Karl, and Chuck, who we'll introduce in a moment. So, one of the nice things about a moment like this is that it's really a moment for community. And I know many of you are stepping up in service and stewardship to your congregations, to your communities, but also really to each other. And so we're really fortunate to bring a big group of folks who are in different parts of the world, or different parts of the country at least, in different parts of the religious landscape, both from a denominational and faith perspective, but also from a role perspective. And so we'll talk more about our panelists in a moment, but just really excited to be here. Some of the ideas you'll hear will be totally inapplicable to you, and some of them will be spot on, and we'll have a whole mix of that. So I'm really looking forward to this and glad to be here. Very quick ground rules before we get to the fun part. After the fact, we'll send around the recording and the slides, so you don't have to furiously take notes. As you might have noted, everyone's been muted. This is because everyone's at home, and so there's all sorts of chaos that we're all dealing with. And then just throw your questions and ideas in the chat as we go. My colleague Lucia is on the line as well. She'll be reading out the questions when we get there, but we're really just thrilled to be here. As a point of order, what we'll do is we'll do some introductions. My colleague Abe is going to walk through some of the survey results so you can understand what's happening at other communities around the country. And then we're really lucky to be joined by Karl, Jim, and Chuck, who we'll have introduced in a second, but really just some of the smartest minds in giving, in plan giving, and they come with a lot of experience, but also they come with a lot of smarts. And so some of the ideas will be from their current role. Some of it will be from just having a broad view of the landscape overall.
Great. Yeah, so as you can see on your screen, as Patrick just said, we're really glad to have this and putting this together. Our hope was to bring together folks who we've spoken with, who we're either working with, conversations with for a long time, and have just been really, blown away by the level of experience and the depth of thought that they bring to what they're doing around plan giving and church development overall. Main folks perspective. So Karl Mattison works with the Presbyterian Foundation. He is their vice president of dioceses, and can bring a perspective on how in and developing things around coronavirus, but also how a diocese or a foundation getting those resources directly to their churches. Jim Bakke, the executive director of the Barnabas Foundation, is working on planning in a very, very deep way. The Barnabas Foundation works directly with churches and ministries on stewardship education, putting together plan giving strategies, and will be able to offer a depth of expertise and knowledge around how to handle things during this time, not just for the churches who are on board here, but also for some of the ministries who have joined us as well. And finally, Chuck Barthuly from Billings, Montana, the director of generosity, and Harvest Church is one of the fastest growing churches in the country. Also, both based on what they have out there, but also on our conversations, has really been at the forefront of some innovations on how to approach things digitally before what was happening, and something they've continued to do in this crisis. So we're excited to have that perspective from a single individual church, things on the ground.
Go ahead.
Oh, if you're able to kick over to the next slide. So this is obviously a crazy moment. This is a quote that we've been thinking about a lot right now. There's no perfect moment to raise. What we all need to do, obviously this is very scary for a lot of nonprofits right now. They are seeing funding, they're seeing donors who have lost their jobs. Churches are seeing members who went from donating to now needing support from the community. And so we're trying to do everything we can, both with our church partners, our ministry partners, and all the nonprofits we work with around the country, to think about what makes this time unique, not in a positive way, but in a way that we can look at things from a positive spin, and what we can do to make this moment a good moment, to support your church, to support your ministry. Found some questions, a survey before the panel, And got a lot of responses, so thank you for those of you who were able to fill this out. Just wanted to share some of those results before we dive in, because I think really inform what we're talking about. And we asked what you all are worried about. The biggest thing we heard was the health and safety of your members and donors, which is great to hear because that's really important to care about. But then the other important things that people were thinking about, how to do their job well and not being able to hit goals, right? Because how you approach your job in making sure that your church or your ministry is financially stable right now, or the churches you support are really stable, is a really different thing than it was just a month ago. And so we're all working together to figure out what is the same, what is different, what is doable in this moment. The final thing that folks are worried about, so obviously something people are worried about across the country, is potential layoffs. And so we can touch on that. A good way to touch on that will be with the CARES Act. We asked folks about that. This is a really, really critical piece of the stimulus legislation that can be really beneficial to nonprofits and to churches if it's used effectively. We're seeing a little bit of a sense of how folks are understanding this. So FreeWill's, there's some great resources already. Make sure to share with you after the call, and Patrick will also walk you through some of the basics of that as well. For folks who aren't yet, read up on that, it's something we definitely encourage you to jump on soon. So we also asked folks what they were most interested in hearing today, just to get a sense for, with this group of panelists we should be focusing on. Planned giving came up over and over again. Insights about how it can be approached with your pastors, with your donors. Another thing we heard was about, how to just share ideas about raising money. The traditional forms of fundraising have gone out the window for some folks, so we're thinking about new ways we can approach this. How we can sustain giving levels when people have lost their jobs, which is obviously a really critical issue and going to be a critical issue for many months to come, most likely. Transitioning things online. So this is a little bit about the nitty-gritty tech piece of things. This can be about the church and also about fundraising for the church. And so we're going to make sure to touch on that. Then just having open conversations about giving in a time when people are thinking about a lot of other things. And finally, just to reiterate again, we heard it from a lot of you. I just want to hear about how other folks are thinking about planned giving. So we'd already given our panelists a number of questions before, putting this survey out, but this really dives into a lot of what we were already hoping to touch on. And we're going to make sure to focus on these areas to the best of our ability through this panel. The final piece from the survey that I wanted to hit on before jumping into this and letting Patrick take the reins was this question: how generosity has changed over the last month. We saw a really interesting split in how folks responded to that. And Jim, has already hit on this, and I'm sure he'll expand on it, but there is a hesitance to ask, and there are some people who can't give right now, but there are also some people who are really increasing their giving in this moment and really stepping up to the plate. And so thinking about how to go to the right people right now and how to make the right asks is critical. This is a dire time for a lot of reasons, but I think seeing, 32% of organizations that responded saying that giving has actually increased over the last month. Generosity's increased, and 37% stayed the same. That's a really positive sign, and we want to make sure that we're getting those numbers higher by helping out with appropriate strategies for how to do that outreach. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick and our wonderful panelists.
Great. So before we start, I've met many of the folks who are here attending virtually, in some cases, a few not. My name is Patrick. I'm the co-CEO of FreeWill, which is an organization focused on planned giving and making that much easier for donors and nonprofits. And we have an amazing team of 55 folks who are normally in New York City and are now sort of scattered across the country during this time. And we've been lucky enough to help nonprofits raise about $1.25 billion so far in bequests. So really excited and really excited to learn from this. Let's start with our first question. The goal here, everyone knows what's happening in the world, and our goal today is let's get things that are actionable and clear and forward-looking as we can move forward. So Chuck, maybe we'll start with you. What are the ideas that you've been thinking about on how churches can effectively transition generosity online in a world where it's sort of the oldest habit that people have that is now being broken about going to a weekly service or more than once weekly?
Yeah, yes. Thankfully for us, there were a few things that we had done already in the past. So, for instance, we don't, at our church service, we don't have a plate that goes by. We have boxes at the end, at the exits, so people can put their tithes and offerings in there. But what that's done, and we've encouraged this over the about last 2 years, we've been working on a strategy of moving people to online recurring giving. And that we've identified this as, we've created a fun name, we call them Generosity Rock Stars. And our thinking about tithing and generosity in general has changed some, and our narrative around that is that we are trying to decentralize that conversation, so it's not just the lead pastor or whoever's on stage that's having these conversations, but it's actually coming from small group members, from people that we've got a strategy called a growth pathway on how people grow in their faith. And along the way, there are these ideas where we are becoming fully surrendered Christ followers. And so each small group or serve team has people that they're shepherding along this growth pathway. That would include looking at, are they attending regularly? Are they in a small group? Are they serving regularly? And one of the things are they giving? Are they spending time in the Word and prayer and listening to the Holy Spirit? So when we're decentralizing that conversation, what we're trying to do is normalize that conversation around money. And we obviously, those of us in the faith, believe that God's in control and that He's got our best interests in mind, and that our generosity is part of what God's trying to grow in us, and that we can be stronger in that. And so what we're trying to do is normalize that conversation about God wants from us. And so it's probably pretty easy for all of us to say, hey, how's your prayer life? Is that going well for you? Are you spending time in the Word? Pretty easy conversations. But then that question would be, how's your generosity? That might be a little more challenging, but I think if it's approached in a holistic approach of, this is what God wants from us, and of course, again, I'd probably, you guys are all more versed in the Bible than I am, but he talked more about money than every other subject. So there's obviously an inherent problem with us, and God knows this, that's going to be a huge stumbling block for us. So the more that we can normalize that conversation and say, this is what God wants for us, better we're going to be. So we've been working on this for, like I said, for at least 2 years, really a specific strategy of normalizing that conversation. Now, that online piece, some people, they feel worshipful in the sense of, I want to write my check and I want to put it in a box, and that's part of their worship. And of course, we don't want to deny them of that opportunity if they're consistent. But some of the things that we talk about that are, we want to be good stewards of the resources that God's given us. And as an organization, the church, we can better and more effectively steward the resources that are being given to us if we have a clear picture of what's coming in. So that's one way that the congregation can be helping us and moving their gifts online. It's more consistent. We know what's coming in. And quite frankly, it's good stewardship of time. We don't need to have now 3 or 4 volunteers that are counting the money and taking the checks to the bank and counting the cash and accountable for that and worrying about, where that cash is and the processes that go into that. So there are some things that, just from the standpoint of being efficient and effective, the generosity online can make some sense to people, especially if they've got a bit of a business mind, like, oh, that makes sense to me.
I'm going to Karl to weigh in here. Karl, you've got a view across, a lot of similar and dissimilar parishes, communities, congregations, and I'm sure some of them are doing this really well and some of them aren't.
Yeah, spot on. If I can just precede my comments with what Chuck said, just pretend I said everything Chuck said, because I love it. I'm going to sway over to the technical side because my gift to the Presbyterian Foundation, my gift at the Presbyterian Foundation is really learning from churches what they're doing well, and where they're struggling. And so I'm more an aggregator of ideas, and we aggregate those ideas by surveying churches, but also by doing some web surveys to figure out what churches are doing in certain areas. And I'll tell you the way that we're trying to help is do a real quick assessment of where churches are stuck. How are we transitioning online? Because there's really two things, there's a third too, but there's two things that we really need to get our Presbyterian churches and probably most of the other denominations engaged with and fast. One is moving online. No question about it. This screen that I'm looking at right now is my pew. There's no one who has a pew today if they don't have a screen. No one. And the offering plate. There is no one who has offering plate passing in front of them without the keyboard right there. That is today's offering plate. I'll just cite for you that the National Study of Congregations' Economic Practices, it's a recent survey, spectacular survey, cites that 78% of gifts are given during a worship service. Okay, we've just shut the door to 78% of gifts. For Presbyterians, and I think for our other denominations, holy cow. I mean, how do you turn the spigot off for more than 3 out of every order? So we have to adapt fast. My mind is blown because we're adapting fast. We do a survey on what churches are doing for online streaming in our judicatories and our presbyteries. That's a group of about 100 churches. And, 4 weeks ago, I'd say maybe 3 out of 100 churches in the places we're surveyed had online services. We've gone in most of these places to more than 60 out of 100 to live or some kind of recorded streaming. Now, Presbyterians are probably the slowest of the people on this call. That's lightning speed by anyone's standards. So we've also looked at some best practices for what are people doing to communicate. How do you have an offertory online? How do you present it on so that it's available for those people? This is our new worship service. This is our new offering plate. This is how you access it using a QR code. Yep, they're long in the teeth, but if you have one on there, we find that it's getting used. And where do you place those messages? Say, look, we're doing great things. Do you want to be a part of this? Having that invitation in there. I have a whole lot more I can say on this, but that's kind of my first comments. And I don't want to drill down too deep because I'd love to hear from Chuck and as well on these other topics.
Karl, that's a great point. One of the trends we're seeing across the faith community, in particular also most nonprofits, is they're surprising themselves at how fast they can move. I mean, it's certainly the case, the Catholic Church doesn't pride itself on speed, and yet you see these transitions happening in 10 days, whereas normally millennia get you. And so really remarkable stuff happening across communities.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Absolutely. Jim, I know that most of your work is in plan giving and just being an incredible steward of funds for so many organizations. I'm curious if you've seen people doing clever things in terms of maintaining revenue, but also maintaining long-term commitments in the coming months.
Well, in my own, as I've been observing churches, my own and other churches that we're working with, there's been the whole idea of faith promise, and what is that going to do with an online presence? We're watching to see where that goes. We're strongly urging, like every other church, urging all of our churches to get online. We've been doing that for a couple of years. But I think it really time is going to tell whether how many weeks we're out of services, and when we go back to congregational services, whether this online giving will just become the norm, whether they're in church or not.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing that we've seen as we've done deep enough is that it's going to be quite a while before services return. And the same thing is true of fundraising events, because the better or worse, the demographics of most of the parishioners tend to be a little bit older, and large gatherings of older folks are going to be one of the last things that return. It's large gatherings are going to happen after people go back to work, and large gatherings of older folks are going to happen after we restart basketball games and things like that. So, Chuck, maybe what's one tip that you've seen in terms of folks maintaining revenue in the coming months?
Well, I guess there would be a challenge to join along with you. So whatever that communication is, we haven't done this yet, but we're in the process of me in this effort. And then I also think that's what critical really is, Simon Sinek always says, start with why. And why are we continuing to give? So we're trying to create a story culture. We always need to remind our parishioners, our congregation, why we're doing what we're doing. And so I think if you can tie a story along with what you're doing and we're giving matters and continues to matter, that's really critical.
That's a great point. But so many people are being so straight to the technical, there's a new way to give, and you have to explain that, but always reminding people of how that might be. Karl, your role, I believe, is heavily planned giving focused. And how are you recommending that churches and ministries and synagogues and mosques all plan giving experts or their efforts in a moment like this?
That's a great question. I'm actually still sorting that out, to be honest with you, because for the first couple of weeks, there was paralysis in planned giving. In the second couple of weeks, there was more in the line of therapy sessions, getting people, where possible, energized again to start thinking about it. Because everyone has been in a pretty deep place with their own personal lives and things like that. So those first weeks were a challenge. Second 2 weeks, we're talking about it. We're having a lot of churches who are rolling out their programs this spring are putting it on ice. They're postponing. The churches who have had momentum on their programs are changing their messaging, but still working the problem. All of them have a plan. And what we're trying to do is get people to work the plan. In any emergency scenario, when you have a system in place, that system has been developed for the good and the bad times. I used to fly planes as a hobby. They teach you how to prepare for emergencies so that you start acting normal and an emergency. And it gives not only a better outcome, I've had an airplane accident, but the passengers were all comfortable. And we need everyone, not just us as leaders, but we need everyone on the plane with us to feel like this place has it handled. So the one thing I'm recommending to churches right now, regardless of their comfort with reaching out to people to talk about planned giving, because we're not there yet. Feedback I have right now is they're not there yet. The most important thing to do right now is to be the church really, really well. And in fact, knock it out of the park. Because right now is the moment that we are perhaps most needed in years, if not decades. This is our time to be a pillar of our own community's faith, but also of our local community, even the people who aren't of faith. People are looking to us. This is our time to act out faith, to be strong, and to knock it out of the park, because there will be a day when we look back at this will be past one day. And people will ask, where am I going to make my planned gift now? Or where will I keep my planned gift now? We need to demonstrate that when we get through this, and we will, that we've done a fantastic job, and we are a great place for that person thinking about a planned gift to continue doing great work after their lifetime. This is our moment. This is our moment. And working the problem, being church well, knocking it apart, is exactly what we can do best right now. And that's going to make the ask a lot easier soon.
Jim, you're simultaneously in a leadership position stewarding the Barnabas Foundation, and Barnabas has a leadership position across all of these churches and other services across the country. So how are you thinking about this?
Well, first of all, I'm encouraging all of our members to recognize a couple of things before they even start communicating with their donors. And the first one is that every one of these emergencies or challenges are going to expose unexpected opportunities that we need to be watching for, and if we watch for them, we're going to find them. So a couple of opportunities we're hearing from our members is, number one, we have a whole lot more time to call our supporters, and those that are using the time to call their supporters are gaining great dividends. Their supporters have increased ability and willingness to talk. The other opportunity we're seeing is that a number of donors are willing to support in ways that they normally wouldn't have. And another one of ours, this is an opportunity to really review their current priorities and focus on the things that are really the most important in their fundraising efforts. Maybe just scale back on some things. So first of all, look for the opportunities. The second thing we need to recognize is that givers give. And if people have the capacity to give, they will. And they'll figure out ways to give. It's amazing to me as I'm watching our donor advised fund participants increase their volume of giving. It isn't necessarily real large dollars, but the number of checks that we cut last Friday and we're cutting today are so far above what we've seen in any March and April that it is amazing that givers are saying we are going to invest in the ministries that we support, some for COVID-related issues and some for just basic. So I would say that if we can just recognize here's some opportunities, our givers are going to give. I guess the third thing, and I've been focusing on this a lot, on what Jesus said in Matthew 6, and that is, don't worry about storing up treasure. Don't worry about all these other things. And he ends in chapter 6 with, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Every day has enough trouble of its own. We're in the middle of this or other trouble. We can either join the folks that are just all up in arms and worried, or we can follow Jesus' words. And so Matthew 6 has been a favorite of mine for years, and I'm camping out there more often than usual. That being said, I would say that the most important thing now for fundraisers and ministries is to be present with your donors. Write to them, call them, email them, text them. Engage them as much as you can. If you can set aside other projects and just get present with your donors, get present with them, and then listen as much as possible. One of the things Karl said is when people then plan, they'll remember you. And the thing here is we want to be top of mind with them when they start planning and doing their planned gifts. And if we're present with them, it's more likely that we'll be top of mind. So listen as much as possible, but then share your needs. Obviously, this is not a time for pressure. This is not a time for overt planned gift asks. It needs to be more subtle. And I think the key here now, the big gifts we're seeing happening are ones where people see that they can make a really big difference. And so as you're communicating with those, if you can talk to them about the difference they make and put it on them as being the person really making a difference, and they're kind of the hero. I think that's where we're going to see the nature givers that have the capacity and the willingness to step up in ways that they never stepped before.
And those are great points. Two pieces of data just to add to reinforce some of those is that you have this huge amount of givers giving. In some ways, the gift officers are feeling sheepish, but the donors are feeling ready. And what we were talking with someone at one of the big donor advised funds late last week, and they said that April was seeing similar giving rates to December. And normally April is totally flat and December is the big month. Mm-hmm. And then on our site, we're seeing 6 times as many bequests in March as we saw the previous March. 6 times, just off the charts. And it's not that people are asking more. In fact, they're asking less, but people are ready to give. We've heard a lot of folks who are making phone calls and people are giving without being asked, just because they're so ready for that connection.
Patrick, I'm so glad to hear you say that you're seeing a significant uptick in planning, because I expect that to be the case. And our ministries will not be remembered in those plans because they put a high pressure ask on, but because they're present in their lives and are engaged with them.
We've seen a lot of folks use a 2-part approach, where the first call is just, how are you? And anyone offers to help, we'll say, well, if you want to, I can follow up with some ways to help. It unlocks this incredible, thoughtful teamwork session where people can think about the stewardship and the impact that they want to have, and you can outline the plans with your own expertise.
Craig Groeschel put it this way: you need to have a no ask. In other words, just be present, connect with them, and that just lends with the credibility that you're going to have on a later conversation. So absolutely.
Chuck, I was actually going to turn to you for this. I mean, I imagine that within any given congregation, there are people that are doing just as well as ever, and there are people that have hit a lower point in their economic life, at least, than they have in decades. How do you think about changing the message and tone for that diversity of experience right now?
Well, yeah, I think I alluded to it before. I think it's, this is a time when we are going to put our faith in God. Now, if we are truly tithing, if you got 0 paycheck, your tithe is 0. So that's pretty simple. And I'm asking them to situation right now. They're going to need to take care of their family and so forth. On the other hand, I like what Jim and Karl have both said. We're going to trust in the Lord right now. And the things that we're doing, we are making a difference in our community. And we've got an opportunity to rise up like no other time, where people are evaluating their faith, considering their mortality, and all of these things that are running through people's heads, that there's a significant change in people's thought process right now. So, we want to, again, I want to say, we want to be a story culture. We want to be a culture of change. We want to be that agent of change. And when we can communicate that, then the people are going to, buy into that and want to be a part of that. I don't think our messaging, quite frankly, has changed much. That we are the hope of the world. We're, the local church is the hope of the, and we're going to continue to be that. And just nuance that this is my personal thing. I've talked to Lucia about this, that I like to change the word. I don't like to talk about donors. I don't see donors. I see them as contributors, and their contribution as being a part of. I know it's a nuance. For me, I feel like a donor is like, here's some money, now you go do your thing. Where a contribution is, you're a part of what we're doing, and you are a part of this movement. So maybe a communication piece like that, that just changes the nuance of what it means to be a part of your church and the generosities of it.
And Karl, I'm going to ask you to chime in on that in a moment. But I also invite folks to start, if they feel if they have questions, Jim or Karl or Chuck, feel free to start adding those to the chat, and then we'll figure them out. So, yeah, Jim or Karl.
I'll share from my experience. As I said, I'm an aggregator of ideas. I've collected messages from a lot of churches to try to figure out how people are approaching this exact and what is the tone. And some of the ones that I found most impactful and helpful are the ones that recognize that, you know, we have three trajectories for people's careers and financial situations. And some people, we want to invite them to listen to the call. I mean, is this their time to step forward? Because this is, as a church, we have to do more now, and we have to do it in different ways. It's a lot more work. We're not at home. So we have that invitation for those who can't step forward, that encouragement for those who are stable, who are where they were, but with uncertainty, but stable. Let's keep going. Thank you for keeping on, because this is an important thing. And for many of those who are harmed with their health or their financial situation, they might be devastated by both. And oftentimes those are strong people. We're all going to have a moment in life. Having that invitation to stay a part of the community, that invitation to pull over to the side and heal, and having that invitation to lead when your day comes again to be strong. As a part of our community, which is really important to us, but they will not feel embarrassed. When they are healed and when they're back, that's their day. They're still a valuable, just not today when they need to take their moment. And so having those three invitations to go up, to stay stable, or to take a rest, I found very comforting, and I think people have welcomed that.
Before I come back to Jim, one thing we'll do also is we're going to post a survey in the chat. And this is just some feedback for us in terms of what can go better next time, what you found really valuable. And also when we do this again in a few weeks, whether you'd like to join. So feel free to make a note there as well. I think this is one of these, we talk about internally as the fastest year of our lives in terms of how much is changing, how quickly. And see this, to Karl's point earlier on, many of your previously slower moving institutions now at light speed. And so there'll be a lot to catch up as well. So feel free to do that as well. I'm actually going to, while we continue the conversation, stop sharing screen so we can see more people's faces. But Jim, we've seen a lot of folks here. You're leading an organization. What are you seeing that's keeping people sane and productive and happy in a pretty stressful time?
So that was a different question than I thought we were going to, but so we've just our own staff, it's been really interesting to watch our staff move from 100% in the office to 100% online and working virtually in their own homes. And so I've seen a variety of things that happen, both good and bad. But I do know that time-honored spiritual disciplines are probably now they've been, and those time-honored spiritual disciplines of silence and solitude and worship and celebration and study are really important. We're at a time when kind of some of the typical ones like church attendance and getting together small groups is not possible. These other spiritual disciplines are really, I think, more important. I want to say that I really appreciate what Karl said about these three different groups of people, because I think you're right. There are those people that are suffering like never before, and we need to make sure that in our talk about generosity, we acknowledge those different groups. I would like to just mention that when you're messaging planned giving, I think really important we continue to, but creative ways that people can give, and kind of give a whole scenario of them rather than what we might think is the typical gift in a will. If we don't, Russell James has often been known to say, don't lead with death. And I think this is probably a really important time, but to also include that as a list. And, with the CARES Act, we've got the $300 above the line credit. We've got the 100% charitable deduction, which a number of your supporters will want to do. The opportunity for IRA gifts for those over 70 is still a great option. The fact that they aren't required to make minimum distributions actually frees up some money for give. And then I think you still need to really emphasize the value of appreciated giving during this time. While the market has taken a significant dip, there's still a lot of people that have assets with appreciation in them, and that really, this may be a time that introduces people to that where they just haven't heard that opportunity before. So I would encourage you to talk about the creative ways that people can give, and I think especially for churches, this has been underutilized, and so I would encourage churches to use this opportunity to talk to people about creative ways that their folks can contribute.
I just want to elaborate on that point because we had a session on Tuesday about this. And one of the really interesting things here is this, with everyone moving a little more slowly and being more open, this is a great time to transition from cash giving for many, QCD out of an IRA, or stocks. And Jim mentioned both of these. See is that when people are anchored on their, instead of their income, which may have slowed down, see much larger gifts generally. And this is actually start building that habit so that if they think about a big capital gain or other things like that. And the other really important point that Jim made, just to echo here, is that the news talks about stock as being down 35% from peak, or 30% now is with a good day. But it's not like everyone bought stock on February 16th, right? Everyone, the market is still up from where it was 2.5 years ago. And so almost everyone will have some appreciated assets. And, it may be a moment for you to brush up if this is an area of specialty. It's not wildly complicated, but it will result in dramatically larger gifts from exactly the same people. And especially as people think about how their disposable income has changed, this wealth, especially for older donors who might be more bond heavy or have more stable funds, will actually be a really good moment. So this is a great moment for you to try as well. First of all, just a quick plug. My colleague Abe just dropped the survey in the chat, so please fill that out. That will be such a service to us, and we'll be really grateful for it. But Chuck or Karl, I wanted to see if you had any final words of parting advice. What's the one thing that people should be remembering as we're navigating this together?
Chuck, do you want to go, or are you?
Karl, I'm waiting for you. You sound, I loved what you've already said, so I appreciate that, and maybe I can tag on to something you say.
I certainly would love to stand on that. No, I would just come back to be the church well, but also to get in the head of the contributor, to realize that this, I'm always back to planned giving myself, that this planned gift, it is for most of us the biggest gift we'll ever make. In most cases, it's going to be bigger than our lifetime annual giving. I mean, it's our moment to really have this huge impact and to keep doing this work after our lifetimes. I mean, this is such a great opportunity. And they really want to see that what they do when they're gone is going to be great. And they are giving us, I think, right now an opportunity to prove it. So that just comes back to the point, we just really need to do what we do right now and adapt fast and be a place of comfort, so that when they're thinking perhaps weeks from now, perhaps a year from now, years from now, where do I want to be working after my lifetime, that we're an obvious choice for them. We're the place that, their vision aligns with. And it's a no-brainer. This is a great place for me to do work after my lifetime. And knock it out of the park. That's my
Thank you.
final thought.
So
Go for it.
I would just, whatever that means to your church, I think both Jim and Karl have alluded to this, that being present, and we are making a huge effort, just a monumental effort to connect with every from our church. What we're hoping that comes out of that is a buy-in of the place that they call home and that they call the church. And, ultimately, so many folks are saying, well, I'm fine, I'm doing well, but there's a few that we're able to serve, and in this time of need are able to connect. And we're building teams to do this too. Again, I think from the standpoint of how can we help our congregation take ownership of, because the church is its people. And as we each play our role in that, the more invested we are. And so how do we knock out of the park? I would just one practical tip of being present and connecting them relationally. Those are the ways that I think you build that credibility within your congregation and your organization. So you 6 months or 5 years from now, place it for then how and parlay into to do their planned or their large gifts.
Thank you, Chuck. I think one of the themes that's been running through this that this is a time like no other for connection, where people are really ready for and thoughtful. So first, I just wanted to say thank you to Jim and to Chuck and to Karl for sharing all your wisdom. I know you guys are busy, both personally and professionally right now. And then I also wanted to give a big shout out to Abe and work into bringing everyone here together to swindling Karl and Jim and Chuck into coming to talk to us, and really just building a great community as well. So huge thank you to them. And the folks that are celebrating on the call as well. One thing we'll do, we know that you guys these days have everything except time and money. And so we put a lot of effort into creating phone scripts for some of the things that we've talked about, sample emails that you can use, other things like that. And so we'll send those resources out here. Lucia's just posted them in the chat. Thank you, Lucia. And those will also be when we send around the recording. You'll get those as well. So feel free to use them. They're free. They're here for whatever you need. You'll have to adjust them for your community, certainly, but they're a great resource. And based on a lot of the experiments we've run and the learnings we have from not just community, but across the nonprofit landscape, who's all dealing with some of the same beast right now. So a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.